Everyone, welcome back to the channel Meet Praneet, and Dobrina, welcome to back to Meet Praneet as well. Uh,
Thank you.
she is the business immigration attorney at Science Garcia Law, and she's here today to help us understand what's going on around the H-1B program. There are a lot of speculations, there are a lot of things going on the internet, on different platforms, and I invited her to kind of clarify some of those doubts that we have and how all of these would play out in the coming session. So, Dobrina, welcome to the channel.
Thank you.
And
I'm glad to be back.
yeah, it was really great speaking to you last time, and I'm really excited for this one as well. So, I think to start with, let's talk about the final rule that came out from DHS. I think that's something that's going to be implemented pretty soon, like on in the 17th of January. So, if you can give us summary of what's going to be changed, what is expected, what is very informational for people like from India and China, because those majorly use this program. So they should be aware of what changes to be expected.
Right, yeah. So January 17th, that's when the final H-1B final rule will take effect. What's gonna happen just at the outset, we're gonna have a new form I-129. It hasn't been published yet, so they're gonna publish on January 17th, and everybody should start using that form immediately.
Got it.
So that's at the outset. So just be on the lookout. Obviously, your employer, your attorney is well aware of that. If you submit your H-1B on an expired form, that will get rejected. So very important to use the new form.
Okay.
Basically, what that rule is, there were some things that were actually beneficial for H-1B, candidates or people who are currently on H-1B. I think the number one thing that actually I find really helpful in terms of, from attorney's perspective and obviously from the employee's perspective, is that the agency actually they codified the difference. So what that means? What that means is that basically, when you're on H-1B and you file for an extension, the rule requires the agency or the USCIS defers to that prior approval.
Okay.
Of course, if they find out that the prior approval was given in error, or there was misrepresentation and fraud, they're not going to defer to that approval. But if that's not the case, technically they should approve the case, just because you already have an H-1B. Why is this important? Because last time during Trump 1.0, they came in, they had an executive order saying the agencies should not defer to prior approvals. So what that meant is, as if like every time we send an H-1B extension or one extension or whatever the case might be, we send it as if this is the first time you're getting that that H-1B or O-1, right? So they didn't defer to the prior approval, and that basically caused a lot of denials last time around. If I'm sure people remember, I had people where they've been on H-1B for 10 years, 15 years, and then we get a denial because they don't care that you already were on H-1B for 1 decade. So that is pretty significant, at least for me as an attorney. I'm sure for the H-1B employee as well. So, and it's gonna, if Trump, if they try to go back to the basically say, oh no, we're not gonna defer to any approvals, that will be really hard to undo.
Okay.
So that's that's a good positive change.
Right. So
I hope it makes sense. Maybe some people just sort of read it and say, I don't even know what that means, but actually it's a pretty big deal.
right. So basically, USCIS will now defer back to the original approvals until there is something wrong with the.
And yeah, unless they find something wrong. But if everything is fine and you've been on H-1B for 5, 10, 15 years, technically, and there's no material change, right? Obviously, if you're changing an employer, if something significantly happens with the new H-1B, then yes, I mean there will be scrutiny. But if nothing has changed, it's just an extension or amendment because you're changing the work site, then they should defer to the prior approval and should approve the petition. So that's pretty significant for me at least.
I think that would also reduce the processing time, because generally if you have if they consider it as a new application, then just
Right. Yeah. And if you consider it as a new application, obviously we have to file everything as if I've never filed an H-1B for that person before, right? So now, I mean, obviously we do file what is necessary, but it's nice to know that there's this deference to a prior, to your prior approval. So in my eyes, this is pretty significant change.
And as you mentioned that the Trump 1.0 government had an executive order to take it down.
Yeah.
But can we and we don't want to speculate, but is it possible that Trump 2.0 can also do that and bring it back to that?
So it's gonna be really challenging because now this is codified. So now this is a rule. So in order to reverse that, they have to either go through a congressional action, which is gonna take months, if not years. So it becomes really complicated, and it's a really long process. So now that this is codified, it's in the law, they can just go in day one and say, okay, we're issuing an executive order and reversing that rule. It doesn't work that way.
Yes.
Now, if they didn't codify, if it were just an executive order, or some kind of agency policy, yes, then they can reverse it. But now that it's actually law, it's codified, they cannot single-handedly just reverse it based on an executive order.
That makes sense. I think that's a big deal for a lot of people who
It is.
especially people who have been waiting for the green card and continuously basically extending their H-1Bs to wait for their
Yeah, last time I remember, I mean, like it was so frustrating because I had clients where they've been 10, 15 years on H-1B. We filed for an extension, nothing has really changed, and we get an RFE or a denial saying, well, this is not a specialty occupation. So I'm like, okay, so it was a specialty occupation for 15 years, but suddenly it's not a specialty occupation, right?
Right. And they changed their code completely.
Yeah. But hopefully now with this, at least this is gonna be protected to some extent, obviously.
Makes sense.
The other change, well, it's not a change, it's just they're codifying it, making it official, so to speak. They've always taken that approach. Since I'm talking about specialty occupation now, so they codified the definition specialty occupation. So basically what that means, what they codified is they said, and I'm reading here, that degree or equivalent must be directly related to the position, defined as having a logical connection. So what does that mean? That means that general degrees will not qualify for H-1B. And they always had that policy where, like let's say you have a just general MBA, that's not gonna qualify for H-1B.
Yep.
So again, this is not new. There's nothing new about it. That was always the policy, except that now it's actually codified and it's part of the law.
Right.
So,
ask one question here, and I think this is something that some people reached out as well, that let's say if I have a bachelor's in computer engineering or computer science, right? And on top of that, I did an MBA just to make my profile better, acceptable. Let's say I did an MBA in finance or what can I still apply for an H-1B based on my bachelor's, or it has to be based on my the earliest degree that I have? Or the latest.
So there are a couple of things here. You said MBA in finance. That's not a general MBA. So that's totally fine. So if If it's just MBA, Masters of Business Administration with no specialty,
Hmm.
then that's the issue basically. So, but this is not new. It's always been the case. I've always, like, when I've gotten these cases where the person has an MBA but there's no specialty to it. Okay, so and back to your question, well, you have a computer, bachelor's of computer science. The position requires a bachelor's of computer science or related degree. On top of that, you have MBA, but you're not applying. The position doesn't require an MBA, right? So it's just something that, you go in with, but it's not, your H-1B is based on that Bachelor of Computer Science, right?
So basically, it should match
Correct.
the degree basically that's required, or the job that is required. Okay.
Exactly, yeah. So we always had that issue with the general MBAs. So they would always push back on it, actually. But now it's codified. So now it's part of the law. And people should be careful, like what you study, like whether you add a specialty to it. Because I know now a lot of MBAs do have specialty, but some are just general, right? I mean, some are just Masters of Business Administration, and you kind of take, classes for 2 years from different fields and kind of combine that, and, you get an MBA. So that will not be sufficient for H-1B.
So this basically, in simple terms, clarifies that if you have, let's say, a degree in mechanical engineering, you cannot be working in computer science role. So basically, that's how it has to be.
Yeah, basically that's unless obviously there's always exceptions, but that might be the case. But then you have 10 years of experience. So when you do the equivalency, you can actually arguably do the you can qualify for that H-1B based on the degree equivalency plus experience, right? But then, going to the perm process, that's gonna be very challenging. And I mean, it's gonna be an interesting perm, but this is not the point of the perm, is not today's conversations. Yeah, basically what to remember is the general degrees now will not qualify for H-1B. So that's another thing that they codified. Maintenance of status requirement. This was always the case. Sometimes, it wasn't, USCIS was not requesting it, but now it's mandatory, meaning that when you apply for H-1B extension or CAP, and you're on F1 OPT, you have to show, it's mandatory to show that you maintain legal status. Through pay stubs, through employment verification, whatever the case might be.
So let's say if my F1 has expired and I'm on OPT, just extended, would that still be a qualified status for H-1B, or?
Yeah, you're on the cap, so you're basically cap gap.
Yeah.
So, when you apply for H-1B from cap gap, obviously you show that you're employed.
Right.
A few pay stubs, maybe a letter from the employer explaining that you're employed if there's issue with pay stubs, and that's how you show that maintenance of status.
Yeah.
Now, the other significant change, since I mentioned cap gap, is that they actually now they added 6 more months to the cap gap exception. So now, I mean, until January 17th, as we know, cap gap ends October 1st.
Yes.
And if your H-1B is still pending for whatever reason, and you don't want to do premium processing, then you're legally allowed to stay in the U.S., but you cannot work because the cap gap basically expired on that day. Now they said no, cap gap will be extended to April 1st of the next. So that helps. Yeah, that helps for basically individuals who file their H-1B late. I mean, when I say late, I mean towards the end of June. Versus beginning of April, when it's allowed, when you can file, and they don't want to do premium processing, right? Or USCIS is just sitting on their case, and October 1st hits in, and then your cap gap is basically over. Now it's gonna be extended to April 1st the following year. So that's helpful.
So in that case, they can continue working.
Yeah, in that case, they can continue working. So that is, that is really helpful for, individuals on OPT and so forth. So I think that's a good thing because, yeah, I mean, obviously the solution is, well, file premium processing and you're gonna get it through. But some people don't necessarily have the funds to do that, and some employers will not do that as well. So that's
And does it by any chance help people? I'm just imagining a scenario. Let's say if someone was an H-1B and are close to, let's say, their turn on their first H-1B or their extension, and they get laid off, right? And they don't have a job. And early, like the time limit right now is to find a job in 60 days, right? But if
Mhm.
you find in 60 days, you have to start the processing of H-1B transfer or maybe considering as a new application. Then can they still stay in the country, or they have to go back to their home country and then come back once it's approved?
Yeah, so if they are within the 60 days, the H-1B transfer needs to be processed within the 60 days. If they're within the 60 days, they obviously remain in the United States and then they start work for the new employer. If the transfer is not processed within the 60 days, obviously either they have to leave the United States and then do consular processing,
Right.
or some people do. So let's say it's like 50 days, you still don't have a job
Mm.
lined up, you're interviewing but nothing really has materialized. Then you have to, some people change status to B2,
Okay. Right.
so that they remain in the US legally. Obviously, when you do that, you can't work, but you can interview, arguably. And then when they find the new employer and they're ready to transfer, then they either do, again, back change of status to H-1B, or they do consular processing and they leave at that time. So
Okay.
yeah, so that's kind of what people have done so far.
Right. And a lot of people also, like few people, especially some of my close friends, also had this question that, okay, let's say I changed to B2, right?
Mhm.
Kept searching for my job. Like I interviewed at different places. Let's say I found a job and I changed it from B2 to H-1B. And let's say after some time, when it's time for my green card, my I-140 application, would there be an issue that I was on H-1B, then I changed to B2 and then got back on H-1B to continue or like start a new job? So would that anyhow affect my I-140 or green card or I-485 application?
Definitely not gonna affect your I-140, because when you file an I-140 application, you don't have to show, I mean, that's not about your status and your compliance with your status or maintenance of your status. When you apply for the I-485, I haven't had any issues with that, and I've seen it. So a lot of people do it. The only thing is, for me, it's actually easier if they do consular processing, because going back and forth between, H-1B, then you have to wait for the B2, and then you have to go back, change status. So, the dates, it's harder to play with the dates.
Mm.
Versus if you find a new employer that is willing to sponsor, you do transfer, and then you do consular processing.
Right.
So, but everybody is different. Some people have families with kids; they can
Yeah,
really just back and go. So that's.
definitely. That makes sense. And what are the other changes that you want to emphasize on, like in the new?
Um, Another big change, actually, and that will impact probably students that are graduating, and entrepreneurs and founders. So now, actually, USCIS codified, basically made it a law that a founder of a company that owns majority, more than 50%, can self-sponsor for H-1B.
Oh, interesting.
So that's a pretty big deal, because it's not that it wasn't there. I mean, people were trying this process, were going through the self-sponsored H-1B, but it was hit or miss.
Mm.
So USCIS, half of the time they would not have it.
Right.
Um, but now, specifically, when they specifically codified that, to me, that single basically sending a signal that they really want to emphasize on people, finding companies and, continuing with their entrepreneurship.
Mm. Right.
So that's a pretty big deal because there's so many people like, they graduate, they get on OPT and then there's like, okay, I really have that great idea. I want to start my company. Can I sponsor myself for H-1B?
Right.
Well, they could, as I said in the past, but it was tough. I mean, a lot of the times they would just deny they were not having it.
Right.
Now, with having that codified, obviously it makes it official, so to speak.
Right.
But the same requirements apply where you have to go through the lottery, obviously.
Right.
The only one of the biggest differences, I think, they give the first H-1B for like 18 months versus 3 years, because so I guess they want to see how that company is gonna, will do in the first 18 months and then they'll extend, further down.
Right.
Um, but that's a big that's a big deal for founders, entrepreneurs, people that want to have their own companies. The only thing I'll add here is that it's not it's a I mean, obviously, it's slightly more difficult to go that route because when you the company, you have to have a C corp, you have to have a board of directors, so it's a little different structure than just a simple LLC that
Uh,
anybody can open.
yeah.
So but it is now, it's on the books, so
Right.
people should really take advantage of that.
So if I have to imagine like two scenarios, right? Let's say one maybe that someone from their PhD or master's getting out of their college and they have an idea, they want to start a company. They
Hmm.
or they basically do all the funding rounds and stuff and make it happen. And then basically they can do it all on the OPT and then file their H-1B from their company, basically.
Hmm.
Interesting. And the second scenario, just to give a little bit more clarity to someone who is on H-1B. Let's say I'm on H-1B and I did my 10 years of experience. I have some idea I want to do that. So can I just leave my job, right? And I can be
Hmm.
outside United States to form a company in United States. That's a great part. So I can go back to India, let's say, form a company here, get everything done, and then come back based on my H-1B from the company that I formed. Is that possible?
Hmm. Yeah, it is possible. But of course, the downside on, going through self-sponsored H-1B is you cannot do a perm for yourself through
Oh,
your company.
interesting. So how would that happen, right? Because this is the interesting part, right?
Yeah, this is so the with the perm process, you have to test the market, right? So once you go through the prevailing wage part and you get the prevailing wage, the company needs to advertise that position to the public.
Right.
And
And
it
it,
has to be, yeah, good faith effort. The company needs to show that they made a good faith effort to recruit for that position. Well, if you're the CEO of the company or you own the majority, are you really gonna replace yourself?
makes sense. Makes sense. So
So that's not good faith effort for like recruiting. So in that sense, usually perms that are, I mean, they just get denied.
mm,
So that's something to think about.
in that case, maybe EB2 and IW or EB1 would be a better option.
Yeah, if you can build that EB2 NAW to get that I-140 so that you can keep extending the H-1B, or even better, the EB1A route, get the I-140, and I mean, obviously you don't have to wait for like 50 years. So you probably will adjust status in a few years, couple years here and there. But that's, that's something to think about. But it's so that people that start their own companies, I don't want to say most of them, but a lot of them do qualify at the minimum for NIW at some point, not right away. I mean, obviously, if you just graduated and you have really no experience or very limited experience, that's not gonna be, a viable NIW. But later down the road, depending on how your company goes,
And after the 18 months, let's say they're still working on their EB1 or EB2 and IW. So after 18 months, the regular extension is for 3 years or still for
Yeah.
8? Okay.
Yeah.
That gives them enough time to build their profile and kind of set their stage.
Yeah, kind of show that, okay, this is really working, or crap, this is not working.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. And I think not all ideas are great, but still
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
Makes
So that's but that's a pretty big deal, because technically, if you think about, the United States does not have a specific visa for entrepreneurs. We
correct.
don't. I mean, there's no, I know that there's the entrepreneur rule, and but that, like, even though they expanded it a little bit, again, it's like 5 people that qualify.
Mm.
It doesn't really apply to the majority of the people, right? So then we have the O1, but that's not really, I mean, we use it, for founders, but then you have to qualify. So it's not something that, really is set for entrepreneurs. I'm not saying the H-1B is the best, but I guess at least it's a step in the right direction.
Right. And
Oh.
any changes to the lottery? I was going through the rule myself, and it seems that they're trying to make it more stringent so that less of foul play happens. But anything that you want to expand on, like which can help people, as we'll go into the lottery pretty soon for this.
Right. Yeah. So the lottery, I mean, they're gonna increase the fee, so that will preclude a lot of people from probably, filing, or registering, employees. So the fee, I believe, is gonna be $250 from 10 to 250. That's a pretty big jump, if you ask me.
You can't just have multiple registrations that people used to do.
Yeah, so that will preclude companies that just register massive amounts of people, and then they're not really like legitimate job offers at the end. But they just register just to see who's gonna get it. And to some extent that was happening last year and the year before, especially the year before, when we had over 700,000 people registered.
Exactly.
Because it was $10, right? So for a company, for an employer, that's not necessarily, very high. But now, if it's $250 a person, I'm not sure that you're gonna register all these 100 people that you don't really have a job for them, right? So that's one. And then obviously, the other change that they actually implemented this year, you can't register the same person multiple times. So
you can have only one place for them in the lottery.
one place, yeah. So that's what, and that was the other reason, not this year, but the year before, we had over 700 people, because, multiple, I mean, the same person will get registered multiple times, and then, it just clogs the whole thing. So I think that's the other change. I haven't read if they're gonna have any more changes, but it's still early. Well, yeah, it is kind of early. Usually, the USCIS comes out like in February at some point, and just releases the, when the lottery gonna open, the registration period's gonna open, when it's gonna end, and what's gonna be the requirements. But for right now, those two main things, like basically the fee, going from $10 to $250, I believe, or $260. And just that, you won't be able to register, the same person 55 times. So,
and one more question. So just to clarify for people who will be entering lottery, let's say I've been searching and I have job offers from company A, B, and C, and these are each different firms, well-established firms. They are all verified by USCIS. So can file 3 applications for me, or I'll have to choose one of the company which will
You
file?
have to probably you have to choose one of those because then that's multiple entry, right? So, and I think that now they're going. So basically, when you enter your information as an employee, you enter your passport number, right? So that's
That's what you will come
yeah.
through.
So.
Yeah, I think when that 700,000 thing happened, I think I also made a video on that. That was really shocking. Like because people are just uh, gaming the system, and then real people who really want to have an H-1B and they should have an H-1B are just not getting a chance because only 110,000 or 80,000 is the limit, right? So that's how.
Right, yeah. No, it was ridiculous. And then obviously what happens is they had to run 2 lotteries, I think that year, if I remember correctly, because like the first lottery and then people get picked, then they drop, but then the company doesn't file their H-1B
uh,
because they went to somebody else.
Right.
So they didn't have enough registrations by the end of June. So they had to do another lottery, but then the same thing happened. So they had to do a third lottery. I think it was two additional, if I remember. It was in July and then November, I
I
think.
think there was second, definitely a second one. The third one I don't remember, but maybe it's possible because there
Yeah,
was.
I think there was one in November as well. So it just doesn't really help much with, the whole H-1B. Um, and then that's how obviously get the bad reputation out there and give ammunition to people to talk about H-1B, right?
Right. And I think one thing that I read back in January 2024, when they had this rule started to come up, that the companies now have to also fill out the complete detail of the applicant. It should not be just the name and stuff. It has to be the job duties and all the information that's required for an H-1B, so that USCIS knows what exactly is gonna be the person's role and not just
Mhm.
is that true, or is it something that was there and now has not been implemented in the final?
I haven't heard about that. So that wasn't there for this year's lottery. I mean,
Okay.
it was just simply the name, the passport number and all that. Now, if they're gonna implement that with the coming up lottery, we'll have to wait and see.
I can see. Got it.
Yeah.
And any other changes that you think are very important for people on H-1B from the final rules that's gonna publish?
Oh, yeah. So there was another one that they codified. So they expanded the site visits. So prior to that's kind of important because prior to the final rule, participation in the site visit was voluntary. So you didn't have to provide. You were not required by law to provide any information to the officer.
Okay.
And sometimes we were not. I mean, if the officer asks for things that are not part of the H-1B at all,
Right.
they'll ask, if, let's say they come and ask me for, I don't know, client's org chart. Well, that has nothing to do with the H-1B. So we will not provide it. We'll just say that, it's not part of the H-1B. So application. Well, now it actually they made it mandatory. Participation is mandatory. So people that get the site visits will have to comply with whatever request the officer sends. So that's something I mean important to remember as well. So.
And I think recently there were some people posting on Facebook groups and stuff that there have been more site visits by USCIS coming to their offices and asking like where exactly you sit, what do you work on, and stuff
Mhm.
for clarity on your role. And I think people should be aware, like if they're going to work from home, they should know that you're working.
Exactly. Yeah, they should know I mean, your application or, if you have to file an amendment, you have to file an amendment because to let USCIS know that you're changing location. So yeah, so that's, I mean, it is important to talk to them and obviously provide the information, especially now that it's mandatory. So that's kind of the other significant change. Most likely we will see more site visits, the new administration. So that's one thing that potentially can expand, and it's just because they like I mean, it's part of the enforcement arm of the USCIS. So if I mean, during the Trump 1.0, we did see a lot of site visits, and the number of site visits increased. I'm anticipating that's probably going to be the case again. So.
Makes sense. So basically, to summarize these 4 points that we discussed, the first one, that the law is now codified that your previous referral, like approvals, would be used to determine
Mhm.
options. I think now entrepreneurs and founders on OPT or maybe not on OPT can also form their company C corps and then apply their self H-1B with the fact that they don't do their perms, so they have
Right. Yeah.
other options. And then I think we talked about the site visits. We talked about that the fee has increased to 60 or to $50,
Mhm.
and that would definitely reduce the number of multiple registrations that generally occur. And apart from that, anything else that you think is very important and people should be aware of in terms of the H-1B system?
I think, again, I don't want to speculate. Obviously, we will have some changes coming up with the new administration. It's
Well,
always the case with new administrations.
right,
Um, Now, what they're gonna change, I cannot tell you. I don't have a magic wand to sort of, see the future, unfortunately. I think to some extent, if they try to limit the H-1B or how many people can come in on H-1B,
right,
maybe they will require. I mean, they will increase the salary, right? So
right,
they will have some kind of a minimum threshold salary that will be very high. So that will preclude companies from using the H-1B for entry-level positions.
right, right,
Let's say, if you want to sponsor H-1B, you have to pay, I don't know, $300,000 or $200,000.
right,
Well, granted, a lot of people on H-1B make, the $300,000, but these are people with 10 years of experience, right? These are not entry-level individuals. So that's one. The other thing is, perhaps, and these are things that, I have read here and there. They're obviously, I don't know if it's gonna happen.
no,
Um, but have some kind of like yearly, like charge the employer some kind of I don't like a subscription fee or penalty fee or whatever fee per year, per H-1B, to sort of
limit,
make it more expensive for them and have basically discourage US employers from sponsoring H-1Bs.
right,
Now, whether that's gonna happen, how it's gonna happen, I don't know. But this is if they're gonna try to limit the how many people will come on H-1B and who should be the H-1B reserved for.
right,
Should it be everybody with bachelor degree who just graduated and up, or should it be just for people with really specialized, highly specialized knowledge, experience, and skills,
right.
or somewhere in the middle?
And I think it's very difficult to determine, right? Because let's say if two people have a degree in computer science and similar set of skills, how would you say that one is maybe more experienced until they have more experience on paper? But if they're on the
Right.
same level, it's very difficult to determine that, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is gonna be interesting to see how, which route they gonna go. Obviously, I don't think that they'll ban the H-1B. The H-1B program, will stay. With, probably a little tweaks here and there. But that's I think, and also maybe some kind of guardrail for the consulting companies, right? Because they're the biggest users
Yeah,
for the
and some
H-1Bs. I think what was it, like 60% go to the Ernst and Youngs and, Tata, Infosys, and, basically the consulting industry.
right. And I think there were reports as well when this all 700K happened that there were a lot of misuse. So I think on those lines, it could be helpful because genuine applicants can have more chance. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, and
Yeah,
I
I
think
think there is, I mean, obviously with any program, any governmental program, there's misuse, abuse to some extent. I'm not saying the H-1B program is perfect. It's far from it, actually. But I think, to be honest, in recent years, well, one of the arguments against H-1B, when you read like, Twitter and X and
right,
LinkedIn and all these
right,
places, people say, well, it's, if American companies sponsor these H-1Bs because, they don't want to pay high salary. They don't want to pay the Americans high salary. Well, I don't think the salaries for H1, I mean, at least now, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, yeah, maybe that was there. But now it's not, I don't think that's the issue. I think the salaries are, I mean, there's no American salary and H1B salary.
definitely. There's not
And
that now. Yeah.
and sometimes I have like, especially smaller companies, like, they say, okay, we wanna hire
Mm.
Raj, for example,
Right.
for H1B, and
Right.
then he just graduated, and he's an OPT, he's doing great work, it's entry level.
Mm.
And I give them the prevailing wage, and it's like they're like, well, we don't even pay anybody in the company that much for that position.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I get this all the time, especially I'm talking about small to medium-sized companies.
Mm.
So I just don't think that the H-1B, the American companies hire them to pay low salary. I don't think that's correct.
Yeah, I think that was not the case. Definitely the misuse, and as it's not perfectly case for sure, but I think yeah, I think that's what I think a lot of people are interested in knowing what Trump 2.0 government would do. And I think I know there's a lot of speculation. I think there are a lot of videos also being made on what will happen, what will not happen, which I think we'll
Hmm.
know as time will tell. Uh,
Yeah.
but one interesting thing that's being floating around, and I think again, we don't know what's the real truth behind it, but the idea is that some of the people like Musk are basically pushing for the fact that it should be a merit-based system rather than a lottery-based system. And I
Mhm.
think that would really help overall. I think it's a good idea. But again, as you see, abuse can happen with any system. But what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that? Like, do you think it's a more better system when compared to the current lottery where it's a chance-based system, or like you on depending on how many people apply and what's the ratio?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the lottery is effective, to be honest, because a lot of people with legitimate qualifications,
Yeah,
um, cannot are subject to the lottery, and then they cannot go through the H-1B process because they don't, win the lottery, so to speak. So how does that help the U.S. economy or to retain the best and the brightest?
very true. Very
It
true.
doesn't. It's just because, yes, either they have to increase the numbers,
Mm.
but we know what's going to happen. They will increase the numbers, and the number of applications will increase
Definitely.
proportionately, right?
For sure.
So let's say they make the numbers like 200,000
Mm.
a year, right? H-1Bs available. I'm 100% sure that we'll get like, 900,000 registrations.
We already saw like 700K at one time. So
Yeah, so I don't think that will help
mm.
necessarily increasing the numbers. Well, obviously, yeah, you'll get more people in, but is it gonna be really the best and the brightest? So that's an issue, obviously. So that's why the lottery, I don't think it works for what the H-1B was intended for, to be honest.
Definitely. And I think a lot of country, like even like Canada has its PR program based on merit, like Australia,
Mhm.
New Zealand is opening their doors for people who have experience in certain areas.
Yeah.
Uh, Definitely, I think with US, the economy, the system they have been using is pretty old. So I think probably there should be a change for the best. But again, we don't know.
We
It's
don't
not
know, yeah, and it's not easy, obviously, to just completely come up with a
very
new
messy.
system. Again, it has to go through Congress, and we all know, how that works or doesn't work. But yeah, definitely, definitely there should be the H-1B program should be reformed to reflect what the the US economy needs, right?
Exactly.
And as you mentioned, other countries are opening to these talent visas or whatever you want to call them. Well, that's why, because now obviously you have the term, the war on talent, right? Who is
Right.
gonna get the best?
Very true.
With a lottery, you don't get the best. You get the lucky people, no?
That's very true. And I think I was talking to some of my friends, and like we had this discussion that I was from the non-cap like cap exempt thing, like I was
Mhm.
research, so it was like I could file any time of the year, so it was easier. And I was saying that if I would have been in lottery, I'm sure I would not get it because my luck is never gonna work.
Well, you never know, right? So you could get it the first time, and then there are some people they try three times if they have that option on OPT and STEM OPT, and they don't get it, right? So that's not yeah, that's not merit, that's luck,
Right.
and you know um
Right.
you don't build skilled force based on luck. I mean, last time I checked.
Definitely. I completely agree. And I think with that, I think the very last thing we want to discuss on a positive note with the new year coming in, that there are some news about that the pilot program of H-1B stamping can be happening within the United States. That
Mhm.
a blessing for a lot of families who are on H-1B or H-4. So how that is coming, like from your experience and your the news that you have, how is it gonna look, and when it's gonna probably start, if it's gonna start?
Yeah, so my understanding is the pilot program was a success.
Mhm.
So they have decided to actually make it permanent. But I don't believe there is a date for it yet. And probably well, I mean, we'll have to obviously see with the new administration how that's gonna play out.
Yeah, yeah,
But definitely, it will be a program that will help, a lot of people who don't want to travel, cannot travel for, various reasons, and that will obviously elevate a lot of the stress and the unknown for a lot of people. So we'll just have to wait and see, when they actually implement the permanent program.
makes sense. No, I think at least people will be now. I think from this video, a lot of the doubts will be clarified with all the speculations that are in the different platforms, forums. And I want to thank you, Dobrina, for joining us and helping us understand this in more easy terms, and rather than what reading through the final rule, as per I say.
Yeah, well, the final rule, I think it was over 1,000 pages, if I
Yeah,
remember.
exactly. It's very difficult to get under everything in this small segment. And so for the people, I think we have a 3 video series that we are planning, and this is the first one
Right.
out. So stay tuned. Dobrin is going to travel to India, so we'll wait for her to come back. But best wishes, and yeah, hope you enjoy your stay in India.
Thank
And
you. Thank you.
thank you so much.
Thank you.